Hello, everybody. Welcome to this live review and analysis of the Dior Haute Couture show for summer 2024. Feel free to say hello in the chat. Hello, Laura. How nice of you to join me. So I've had a look at the Couture show, and it was actually suggested by Laura because there are some very pretty colors in there. So I'm going to analyze some of the looks I thought were quite interesting from a pattern cutting perspective, and sort of review how I work, how it might be related. So this is not going to be like a fashion critic review. It's more looking at it from a perspective: how is it made, why does it work, what are the little details we can use to inspire ourselves. So hello, Susanne. Lovely of you to join me as well. Have you seen the Dior collection before or yet? What do you think? Yeah, let me know in the chat what you think of that collection. And before we get into the images, I thought it was a really nice, it's quite a lot of work she's doing with Dior is quite quiet. I quite like it, like the clothes stand at the center. It's not a big show. There's not lots of drama. It's just very beautiful clothes, which is what I enjoy. But they're all quite exquisitely cut, and they're very wearable as well, which I like. Because you always like with Dior, with Raf Simons, for example, they're beautiful clothes, but around the clothes you would maybe wear as much as the current ones. Oh, so Suzanne, you had a look at it as well. So I hope I picked a few looks. It's always a bit tricky, but I hope you like the ones I picked. And I picked them because they're interesting from a pattern cutting perspective as well. One of the things I noticed as soon as I saw them is that you see lots of styles in like a silk moire, which Dior used on the really famous La Cigale dress. And if you want a analysis of the bodice part and also of the skirt, then you can and a drafting tutorial for the skirt as well, then I've got that actually on the YouTube channel. I can put it in the description below, but if you search it La Cigale on my channel, you will come across it. And it's that sort of very marbled silk. It sort of reflects the light, it has a life of its own. It also makes it quite hard to pick out some of the pattern cutting details. So a lot of the styles I've chosen, the moire was one of the main fabrics, and there was some cotton and some wool, the typical grey wool she uses so beautifully. So I've picked styles in that. But you can still see there she's still looking at the classic Dior when you look with styles like that, and how she translates it into a really contemporary collection. So without further ado, let's have a look at some of the styles and then switch over to the table view. And yes, if you leave me a thumbs up, that'd be fantastic, because then other people will come across it more likely on their home screen. So the things I thought were quite clever and very quiet was this suit style. And what I quite liked, she basically showed similar style, the same style but different fabrics, and they can look very different. So I think this style was both in this wool, which is actually, the wool is far more interesting when it looks at first glance, and she also did this in a silk moire, so you could see how different it looks. But that had that real sort of classic new look Dior feel to it, with a skirt sort of curving out, and then this really beautiful, very cleverly done collar, which is a lapel collar, but then you can see where it's like, it looks like it's crossed over, so it looks like it's crosses over and under, which is actually, I think, much easier to draft than it looks like, but it's a beautiful detail. And you had that sort of feel of a suit as well. You had another sort of interpretation of both the classic new look, the bar suit, but also I thought this one, the Dior suit, that had like a sort of interpretation of Le La Cigale. We've done it differently. We've done it as a tripod and a bit like a bra shape with a roundness and then going up, but I saw that sort of had echoes of the Elastiga and a really nice shawl collar. And hello Erin and hello Maria, good morning or good afternoon in my case. And Maria, I'm glad you like the collar. I think it's quite beautiful. But that's what I mean about what I think it's quiet in the sense it's very wearable. It's all about the clothes, but they are utterly beautiful. And after that, I'm also going to look at a slightly bigger collar, which I still nonetheless liked, which was this really over the sized cape type collar, which is actually, I thought it was a trench coat with an oversized sort of, it's definitely a cape. It's basically like a grown on cape thing, but it's actually a dress because we can see we got this sort of trench coat details below the belt, but above the belt it's actually a normal dress. So I thought that was quite interesting. So let's have a look at these in detail. Let's get rid of that. Get rid of that. There we go. You can see I've got a new setup. So we've got sound, we've got a new setup, we've got a new camera, we've got no lagging. It's all very exciting here. So I can actually concentrate on the clothes rather than having to always worry about technology letting me down. With styles like that, what we of course always want is, I want to look inside these garments because that is quite a thin wool. If I try to zoom in a little bit, can you see that it looks like quite a fine, it could be a flannel, I'm not quite sure. It looks like it might have a little bit, tiny bit mohair in it, but quite silky. It's a very soft wool. You can see how here around the skirt part it is actually sort of not collapsing, but it's you can see it's quite a thin wool from how it's collapsing. Sounds awful, but you can see how it's not quite standing very stiffly. So you can see it's actually very drapey fabric, which probably already has been reinforced, but they've left it quite unstructured, maybe is the right word. Can't spell today. Let's hope I can draw if I can't spell. So let's go through the tutorials, or like through the drafting methods which are in that jacket. So we've got a nice hidden button stand, sort of quite a average amount single button stand, and then I think it's a shawl collar here. Quite often I think with styles like that it is a shawl collar, but it probably has a roll collar or a banana collar at the back. And there's, of course, if you're my membership or my pattern cutting school, there's a tutorial on how to do the classic shawl collar, but with that sort of roll collar, it's just the back, and that will help you sort of reinforce the back section, because you can see on the jacket it does it stands up quite nicely, but it gives you the really nice soft collar. And then what I loved about the collection, there is lots of gusset sleeves, and if you haven't done a gusset sleeve, try one out, because I think they have a reputation as really tricky, and the only thing which is a bit tricky if you do a classic gusset is to get the stitching right, but apart from that they're actually a really nice collar. And I find, for example, for my shoulder shape, the fit is often better than for satin sleeve, and once you drafted one, they're quite quick to draft, and especially if you don't do a classic gusset, if you do like a paneled gusset when we're actually really straightforward. So this has like, I think it has a real sort of T-bar, a bar suit feel, because I think we had a short collar as well, and it had that sort of course, on the classic bar suit, the skirt is a little bit more structured, but they even got the sort of pleated skirt, so it's like a really nice interpretation. But then it has these sort of underwear details, sort of the contouring details. So it's sort of details which are normally used on things like bras and corsets, but in a suit it always sort of it's been sort of appearing quite a lot, but it is a detail which just works because it adds something a little bit different to a classic suit. It's sort of like takes it to a slightly different level. And then of course, if it was a gusset, it would have a little gusset here, and I think it is a gusset just because it hasn't got too much draping, too many gathers on when I actually looking at it. If you look at the sleeve, if you try to zoom it in, can you see on the underarm sleeve, you haven't got an underarm seam, you got like a two-piece seam, and that means it's actually a strip gusset. So it's actually easier to construct with a classic gusset. So it's something, it's like this. And then I have a suspicion that I think that seam goes like that. So that cup shape actually becomes part of the gusset. And then it's probably a seam here, but then this part sort of goes in the gusset and this part goes up in the gusset. And then, of course, the other pattern cutting piece is actually all in one. So this is all one pattern piece. So the front is actually only done out of one piece here, and then the side piece, which is probably cut in two with a separate underarm piece. But it's actually very clever how you can, have one piece. You don't need to have seams paneling. You can use darts in quite a clever way. And Laura is saying, do the gusset sleeves feel tight across your back? I have a broad back and wasn't sure it would be too restricting. I actually find them, they're fine. They're similar to a satin sleeve, and it's quite easily you can add little fitting or more space. And what I quite like in that case, if you want lots of movement, Laura, and I know you do lots of things where you have your arms forward, you can have a gusset at the front, and then you can have a raglan at the back. So you can mix and match them. And with the raglan, because you got the seam, you can actually have you can add a bit more of a wider angle and more movement. But on the gusset sleeve, basically it's the same. It's like you can have it super fitted, but if you do it slightly more up, so more like a raglan sleeve, you can have more movement in there. So you can adapt it to your needs, which is always what's nice about having beautiful styles like that, but you can make them practical and suit your purpose. With this jacket, I haven't seen the back at all. I would imagine it's got another gusset sleeve at the back probably, and then maybe it probably will have some sort of seaming, but I have no idea why, how or where. Or I think with the classic Dior bar suit, they have the front and back are pretty similar. So this might be something like this. I'm not really sure. The thing on the catwalk is sometimes quite hard. You can't see the back. If you're lucky, you can, but quite often you can't. But this was quite a nice style where you can, for example, if you have a if you see a sewing pattern with a grown on gusset sleeve, you can adapt it, and if you wanted to do it, you could use, if you're on my pattern cutting school, you can use the statement gusset, but instead of having a front like that, so your side panel goes into the gusset, you can have this shape as well. And then the strip gusset, which I'll call a strip gusset, is basically the underarm sleeve, a separate underarm sleeve, which just again makes stitching everything a bit easier because you don't have that keyhole underneath your arm if you have a strip or an underarm part. But you can sort of use that method to create your own. But then it's like, this would be a really nice detail for any jacket with sort of cup shape, contouring shape, which it's sort of been around for a few years. It pops in and out, but I like when they're done sort of, they've been done well and not so well. This is quite a good interpretation, I think. The other one suit I wanted to have a look at, because it has another beautiful detail, is this Dior crossover collar. So actually, let me zoom out. I want to see the whole suit. It's like a cropped version of the last one, isn't it? So it's quite similar, but shorter. And let me zoom in into the sleeve. And again, oh, it's hard to see with that fabric. If I think you can see the underarm line a little bit, so I would imagine it's a similar gusset construction, but it hasn't got that cup shape. In this case, the dart shaping is actually done through our crossover collar. Well, at least that's my suspicion. I've had a bit of a look of it, but quite often, like, if you can have a proper investigation in the shops, or you can sort of well, this is couture, this won't be in the shop, but the things which filter down into the ready-to-wear collection, it's always quite interesting when you actually see it and see how it's made. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, the difference between couture. What I quite like about, well, there's always the discussion about what makes something haute couture, you know, because this is sort of quite often, like, haute couture is like the big dresses people sort of buy for special occasions. I think, I don't know whether that's true anymore, but for a while Chanel was the only haute couture collection which actually paid for itself. So a lot of the other houses for haute couture has always been about basically keeping the brand alive and sort of showing people that's our sort of story, our craftsmanship. So if you buy a handbag or you buy the perfume, you're buying into that, you know, that storytelling, that appreciation into craftsmanship. So you can be part of the haute couture, even if you can't afford the £10,000 suit. So it'd be interesting to see whether, I haven't got any figure whether Dior actually sells. So I know it has a gusset which is sort of becomes the underarm part, and I've drawn it slightly asymmetric because one of my sleeves was too narrow, but you can see it's got the same gusset as the other one, but then I actually can't see it properly. I wonder whether this might just have a less noticeable gusset, like a shape like that. So instead of a side seam, you might have a side seam brought forward, or you might have a side seam and that shaping seam. But that's in a way up to you. So you can have lots of fun when you're using gussets like that. That's what I quite like. It's a bit like when you have a satin sleeve. You don't have to you know, go with the basic satin sleeve. You can make it square. You can, you know, you can play around with that as well. But what is really clever here is that it looks like the sleeve, the collar goes underneath. So you've got the top collar like that, or a top wrap, and that's a classic sort of tailored collar, beautifully made, of course, probably with a separate roll collar at the back. And then you got this sort of magical under collar wrap, which seems to go underneath and then slot out. And when you first look at it, you think, ooh, maybe it's, maybe it's something amazing has been done. There's been I've cut a hole or something and threaded it through, and it's like a wrap. But what it actually is, my suspicion is, and you can see it because if you look very, very closely, I'm going to really zoom in now, that it's actually the dart. So basically, it lines up like that, but then on here, that is slightly different because, of course, every time she moves, it might look perfect on a still photo, but if you move your jacket slightly opens and closes, which is why it doesn't line up completely. But what it basically is, it's a dart, probably the bust dart, which has been pivoted, and you would probably have to do it on right after you've done the twirl to see exactly how your collar sits on the garment, because of course even if you can draw on the flat, but it's never quite perfect. So on the garment you can then see, oh, my collar would continue like that, and when you pivot your dart into the bottom position, and then instead of stitching the dart on the inside, it's basically stitched as an outside pleat, and you can actually see where the stitching line is as well, and I think that's what it is. I can't be 100% sure, and it could be, of course, either be stitched at the bottom or the top. For me, at first, I thought it was open at the top, but you could have it the other way around again. But all it is basically an inside-out dart, which then becomes a pleat or volume. And then what would probably happen is, because of course the dart goes, if that's our jacket collar, and it rises up like that, your dart like that, you just have basically a dart like that probably. And then it's probably up to here, it's probably stitched, and then from there they've probably trimmed the excess volume off because you don't need it. It might even just literally be to the fold, you have the extra volume. And that's where it would be interesting to see how it's finished. I love to see that. Or they might actually say, then they might actually have a separate part here. So they might have chopped that bit off, because then it actually be easier to make. And then they just have a plate with lots of volume, and then they construct off the rest of the collar. So that's my thinking. But you can play around by what you would do is you draft your classic tailored collar first, and then you can probably sort of outline it on the flat, but safer would be to make a twirl, and then you can draw in your dart to look like that. But I thought it's a really clever way of using the classics of suit, but then making it a little bit more interesting. And the other one is like in a silk, so it looks completely different. It's also quite interesting because both of the suits we looked at so far, I think they look like they've got shoulder pads. Can you see? I think so. Again, it's like with a gusset, it can be either really soft, or you can actually have a shoulder pad for a little bit of extra structure. And just make sure if you do that, you use a grown-on sleeve shoulder pad. So let's have a look at the next one. One I wanted to show you, because I thought as a quick one, that's a really clever detail, is this one, which I think was the beginning of a collection, which is quite different from the two grey suits, isn't it? So it's quite a variety. But I think she was using lots of different influences for this collection. And she always there's always like an art connection. So this time there was some really big paintings in the background. But it actually sort of works with the collection rather than detracting from it or superseding it. So this is a really simple, it's actually, what do you think? I don't think it's that as interesting. It feels sort of, at first glance, you say, oh, that's sort of Balenciaga maybe. I wouldn't have guessed that as Dior, which is But of course, you always have like very perceived, you think, oh yeah, classic Dior is a bar suit, and then sort of different Dior styles. But of course, we've had 60, 70 years, more than 70 years of Dior, so there's lots of different styles. But the reason I wanted to show you the the basic, there's a basic crew neck, which I've drawn completely wrong. I've drawn it like you would wear it on a garment. So this is the basic crew neck. It's what I quite like. It's a very understated collection. So looking at it, none of the pieces have any buttons. Again, here you have like invisible stitched poppers or invisible button stand or concealed button stand. And again, on this one, you have concealed button stand or poppers. Quite often use poppers for something like that. And again, on this one, you can actually see that must be a popper there. So it's quite unusual. I quite like it. So you don't, oh, sorry. It really draws attraction to the clean, it's very clean lines, these clothes. It's not sort of nothing you don't need. So to tell you the truth, I'm not quite sure what's happening underneath the arms. I actually had suspicion it might be a cape. So I think this might be either a gusset sleeve, but I did wonder the way the sleeves fall. It's either like a nice big sleeve like that, or it might be something there, because they are sort of asymmetric, so they look like they're disappearing behind the body. And because she's done some other cape sleeves, so it could be it. And then what you would basically have is a this undersleeve probably gets stitched to the lining of the whole sleeve. So you have sort of a sleeve constructed like that, but then from the back it becomes a cape. So I'm not quite sure that's how it constructed, but it looks either a very flat bell-shaped sleeve, which has an asymmetric cuff like that, or it's a really nice cape. And we got a cape somewhere else, so it could be a cape. But what I wanted to show you is, again, this is a one-piece coat, but it has shaping. So we got our bust and waist shaping, well, really bust shaping, but then it actually becomes like this. So it's all cut out of one piece, and then the side seam actually disappears. So you can see how the lines, if I zoom in a bit, can you see how it disappears? And then the dart actually, so the dart moves down, and then it actually, I've drawn a bit too round, but it basically, it sort of goes into each other. And then of course what would happen is, because we've got the dart shaping, the pattern piece looks probably something like this. And then what you would do, you would have it so that the pattern pieces are just touching as close as possible, which probably means the pattern, it might go just a little bit below like that. But from the outside, it looks like it's sort of impossible to stitch. But then you have the pattern going on like that, and then you have your pocket back in a separate fabric. And then of course where everything stitches to a side seam. But I thought that was a really clever, again, really understated way of pattern cutting, and it has this sort of it's similar to our original grey T-bar inspired suit. So again, it's like one piece, very clever pattern cutting which moves around the body. Let's have a look at the other cape, which is why I suddenly thought, oh, maybe this is a cape, which is this one. So you can see why I suddenly maybe thought there were lots of capes involved in this collection, but it's probably, I think this might be a flared sleeve. And I read details pretty enough. And this again, these are the sort of details where you can easily make, you know, like a swing coat, or something like that, or a jacket, or even a top, but you can just use a clever way of dart shaping to create like a magic pocket. And then this was the last one, and Suzanne says, that's my favorite. I thought it was a trench coat too. You could work it into a coat. Yes, totally. And it's just, it's quite interesting because so if I zoom in, I saw that's such a trench coat look. It's got everything. But if you actually look above the belt, you can see it becomes, there's nothing there in the front, or nothing noticeable. There might be stuff sort of hidden we can't see. So I think it might be actually a dress with lots of trench coat details. Either way, as Suzanne said, you could easily do it on a trench coat as well, any coat. But what it is a really clever collar. So whether you do a trench coat or a top or anything, of course, what is quite interesting, but I can actually see a way of getting in. I wonder if you see the back, where the back is actually open as well, because I assumed there was a cape, but I'm not quite sure. So what we have is this really big cape, and we got some pleats there, and I think that's to make it a little bit more, give it a little more body, so it's not like flatly fitted, because then we got our drawstring, and it is sort of slightly drawn in, so it's not completely flat. So it creates a bit of tension, it creates a little bit of sort of volume, rather than it just being a very fitted. So you can sort of see it's slightly drawn, we're sort of slightly gathered basically. So it's not completely flat and fitted. So it looks something like that. And then of course we got our drawstrings. Oh, Maria also saw it was a trench coat. I thought so too. And then this morning, preparing for this, I had a proper look. I thought, oh, it's not a trench coat. It's even more exciting. I'm going to draw the under. So what we have underneath is just probably a basic. It's not fully fitted. You can sort of see it's like you could do with a relaxed bodice or a jacket block. But you can see again, it's got a little bit of volume there. It's got a little bit of ease there, design ease. And then it's got a classic beautiful trench coat sleeve, which is most of the time it's actually just a two-piece sleeve, but then it's slightly cinched in at our cuff. But it's always little details, however, quite oversized as well. Like it's got quite a chunky belt, and then the cuff belts as such, they are also slightly oversized, so it's really nice. And then it's got that sort of pretend trench coat, which is why we all thought it was a trench coat. And it's got the typical Burberry or Aquascutum trench coat flap, pocket, and it's got, actually I haven't got the whole image, but at the bottom, this actually, rather than being a button stand, it becomes some sort of pleat or fold. I couldn't quite work it out from the image, but it's quite interesting. And Suzanne is saying, I wonder if I could use it as a hood too, and that's what I thought, Suzanne. And I think if I would draft it as a jacket or a coat, so you then have underneath, you could have it like that, isn't it? And then all you need is one button up here, so it could be quite plain, which is quite nice. And of course it could be that we're just not seeing that seam there and it goes underneath. If it is a dress, I think the back probably has some more pleats there, and I wonder whether the back actually looks like that. So it's actually open, so it's like a Peter Pan collar, and then it might have a button here and, you know, an opening or something, or, you know, or it's just a zip. And then it has again the sleeve. However, if I did it, I think if you would want to use a hood, I would literally do it like that. And then if you wear it as a hood, if I'm gonna draw it from the side, which I'm not very good, the it would be like a really big sort of, you know, like is it Georgian times maybe, where you have a hood with lots of volume and you draw it in like this, and you could do it quite tight, but it would be quite big. I think it is Georgian. So you end up with like a really drapey hood, which very quite often in Georgian times I think was like a silk, but this would be quite stunning. Probably quite a nice, be really oversized the hood, but at the same time sort of actually draping around the face, which might be quite good fun. So definitely try that out, Suzanne. You know, that's a nice thing, is that you can look at collections like that, which are, you know, so out of price league for probably anybody, but you can sort of see little details. You don't have to copy it, but you can make your own versions which fit you, and you know, have the details you want but not the details you don't want to, but you can be inspired by it but still design your own version of it, which I always quite like, so you can have the best of everything and for a price you can afford. Okay, the last thing I wanted to look at is this one, which is completely different. It's been all like outerwear. Maybe I shouldn't look at this, but I thought this was a really, there weren't that many dresses in this collection. It was really mostly, there's a lot of suits, but I quite liked this, it's like a classic wrap dress, but done beautifully. It's like, the way it wraps around the body is really nice. The way it hits the shoulder is quite beautiful. And again, it's got a grown on sleeve. And it's sort of, again, it's actually echoes some of the other lines. And sometimes this fabric like that, it's very hard. You can't actually see what's happening. I wanted to quickly zoom in to the, it looks like a classic wrap dress, doesn't it? It's got the pleats, stuff like that. It's got a full skirt. But what I would love is that dress. I think if that dress is reinterpreted into a high street or even ready to wear, it probably just be a classic wrap dress. It would have, I want to see the back on this one, because if you bought it in a shop, it will have a high back neck, because otherwise it falls down. But I wonder whether there's some under construction, that this is actually sort of built on top. Oh, that's bad. Oh, that's very badly drawn. I apologize. It doesn't look any, I'm going to start again. It doesn't look anything like it. So we got this very wide neckline, which normally at the back, if you have like a really low neckline at the front, you need a really high neckline. And then we've got the wrap going like this, and then we have the wrap going on the other side, and it's got some pleating. So if you want to do wrap dress, you would do your darts into volume into the front, and I think it's a dress, so I think it's probably all one piece, because the way it sort of moves quite, it looks like it just moves on, but I'm not quite sure, because you've got all the volume in the skirt, so it probably means you have to have a waist seam hidden underneath it. I can't tell. I'm going to zoom in one more time. Yes, I think there's actually a waistband. I mean, it's tied on. Actually, I'm not sure. It's hard to see. If you look at it, you can see it even looks like a classic wrap dress. But we got a lot more volume in the skirt than we have in our bodice. So I think there's a seam hidden underneath it. And then, of course, we've got another beautiful gusset sleeve. That's much better. There's always a problem if you use like a drawn silhouette, it's much easier to see what you're doing. Sometimes if you're like me drawing by eye, it can go terribly wrong. But if you bought this on the high street, or even, you know, not so, if you bought in like a ready-made garment, I think this would just be a normal dress, and then it would have to be very carefully cut that this point is actually slightly in, because for her, you can see that's basically more or less off her shoulder, which of course means it would just constantly slip off. And I have the suspicion that maybe it even goes down at the back. So if you bought something like that, you would always have fitting issues, because it would have to be perfectly shaped. It would have to be really contoured around the neckline at the front and the back, so it really hugs the body and doesn't fall off. But of course, you all know if you buy something ready-made, it's never made for our bodies, so you will have to actually change it all. If you draft yourself, you have to do lots of contouring around there and hit this point. Probably slightly further in when she is done. So just where it dips from your upper arm muscle. That's how you could do it really there. I wonder whether here and whether there's actually a structured garment going on underneath. So this is very lightweight, but then you probably have like a slightly more supportive garment like that, holding it up, which might be even, you know, on a lightweight corset, so it holds this whole thing in place. That's with garments like that, you always, you know, you have to sort of start thinking, you know, most of us would make it as a wrap dress, but then you have to change the neckline slightly just to make it practical everyday life, because there's nothing worse than something which slightly slides down. But then the really interesting thing is when you actually look inside these and see what happens. So it might be something which is, you know, a silk, but then it's actually mounted on an undergarment made out of power net or something, which holds everything in place. It gives you a really nice floating silhouette, but it can be floating because it doesn't actually need to do the hard work of holding it together. It literally is like mounted on the corset, and the corset does the hard work, and then this is just draped on. So these are always the sort of things I want to find out more about, and of course, you know, most of us, I would make it as a variable dress, so I would make it without a corset, and I would just basically move it slightly further in. But I thought it was a really nice example of something which actually, this, you know, our, if I show you, this one looked really complicated, but it's actually just a dart, so it's actually easier than it is. So it looks sort of mind-boggling, you know, optical illusion. While the wrap dress, you think, oh yeah, it's just a wrap dress, you know, quite straightforward to dress. I think to make it fit like that, actually quite not complicated, but it's sort of, there's a lot of thought gone into a dress, which can basically more or less slide off your shoulders, but then still drape around your upper body. Because quite often in the high street, if you have a fitted top, and then you can have these sleeves, and quite often they use a shearing, so it's very tight around the sleeve. But for this one, it's sort of floating off the body. It's quite beautiful. Just to marvel at, even if you then make a slightly more practical version of it. So this is my review of the most recent Dior Haute Couture for spring summer. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next Thursday at the same time with something else. We'll be looking at maybe a vintage dress. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining me, and have a lovely Thursday. Bye bye, everybody.